He asked me and I said yes.
We should get started if we're live. Great. So welcome to this week's Climate Solutions Caucus. The two items, we had more items up for discussion, but they are geared more towards senators, and most of the senators have to leave by 12:30 due to a floor amendment. So this will probably be a slightly shortened meeting. The agenda for the meeting is to have Senator Watson present on S100, which is a housing bill currently in the Environment and Energy Committee. And then we have Representative McCarthy here, who will be speaking about another bill that is currently in the Senate. It's a committee bill focused on our renewable energy standard. And we also did have some handouts, and we have another visitor who has a handout as well. And if I'll just say it now so we can hit straight to the S100. Tom Perry has been involved in a program called Zero Energy Now, which effectively helps Vermont homeowners to get to as close to net zero as possible with their property, given current technologies, given whatever they currently have in their home, and given available financial incentives, leasing, and loan opportunities. And so Tom is going to pass out a sheet so you can add it to your pile. Feel free to pass it out. And he's also available to chat with you more and answer questions that you might have once we've finished up with the caucus meeting core. So with that, we'll shift to S100 right as Senator Watson is chewing.
That's okay. No worries. Thank you. I think I should stand.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Stand up.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so S100 is, there are a lot of parts to S100, and so I'm afraid I may not be able to hit all of the details, but I'm happy to give you some of the highlights. So you can think of this bill as having, largely speaking, affects zoning regulations, and it affects Act 250. So in terms of zoning changes, it would allow something called duplexing by right. So anywhere that a municipality allows for a single family home, they would have to now, by right, allow that property to also build a duplex in that same area. And similarly, it would require that if there's water and sewer in a space, that they would be able to they would be required to allow 5 units per acre. Now, there are some exceptions to that, but we've have talked about the water and sewer as like buried gold. You know, if there is a place that we want more housing to be concentrated in, it is over places where there is water and sewer. And so we want to encourage density in those places. There is an aspect about energy codes that the Natural Resources Committee did modify from the Economic Development.
Thank you, Scott.
Well, so there's a couple things. So yeah, right. So one is it was H332, which was Representative Campbell's bill about a summer study on getting there to be better compliance with the RBs and CBs, right? The building energy codes. So we built that into the bill. So it's just incorporated in, which I think is great. But then the other aspect is that so it does require that a municipality can't have any stricter energy codes than the state energy codes unless they go through a charter change process to get that changed. Other great aspects, I think one of the things that I would think is a value of the caucus would be to create more housing in density, right? Like that we want to arguably build up. And so there's another provision that would require, or I should say allow, affordable housing projects to have an additional floor with like a 40% bonus in density. It also, in terms of Act 250 stuff, it allows no cap in the number of priority housing projects in designated areas. It also creates an increase in, so there's something called the 10-5-5 rule, which I learned a lot about through this process, which is to say that in places without zoning, you could build 10 units in 5 years within 5 miles. That was the limit. But it raises that to 25 units in 5 miles in 5 years. Again, for designated areas, but only for 3 years through 2026. And then that provision sunsets. So that was a compromise that the Natural Resources and Energy Committee and the Economic Development Committee landed on together. And in part, we landed there because there are a couple of reports that are due back about the designated areas and how we might be revisioning the interface of Act 250 with those designated areas. So giving us a sunset, or I should say time to try this and also revisit it with the sunset seemed to be a good space. Sorry, there's so many things. No, you're too fast.
No.
It's okay? Okay.
You're doing great.
Just checking in. Questions so far? There's more. So happy to pause here and take questions.
Just
Yeah.
a quick question. Why were village centers left out of those exemptions?
That's a great question. So the designated areas is, I believe, included, but we added, so this is actually a later thing. We created a new designation called enhanced village centers, which is a village center that has, oh gosh.
They go through the process of enhancement. I mean, it's.
Yeah, they have to show, I think they have to have bylaws, they have to have capacity, both in terms of like some kind of water capacity as well as staff capacity. So, the thinking was around, we wanted there to be some structure to support the addition of housing in that area. Does that make sense?
Okay, I got it.
Okay, great. So that's that. And there was another question. Yeah.
So I'm on the planning commission in Colchester, and we just kind of looked at a section of Lake Shore, Lyons Lakeshore Drive, and the public input from the people that live there was they didn't want more than 2 floors because it blocks views. And I'm just wondering, is that, will that, I have read the bill, but I couldn't discern whether that would still be possible.
There is that one provision about the additional floor for affordable housing projects. So I would have to look at the specific language because I think it might be possible. It depends on what the height limits are existing for that area. I mean, if you're already capped at 1 floor, then could you bump up to 2? If you're at 2, could you go to 3? It's capped at 2, so you could theoretically go up to 3 if it's an affordable housing project. But I'm happy to chat more with you and look at the language. Thank you. That's a great question. Yeah. Any other questions before I keep going? Okay. All right. So jumping in again, as a change to the Act 250 process, some of you may be familiar with the group of 10 that can appeal. So that language was struck by the by the Economic Development Committee, but it was reinstated in a modified way by the Natural Resources Committee. And it was modified in a way that made it clear that you can still have a group of 10 appeal. However, that group of 10 must demonstrate that they are suffering from a common injury, like a shared injury. So it's not just any group for any individual reason, which I think is really what that provision was probably intended to do anyway. So we just made that clear. And then a couple other points here. We also scooped into it Senator McCormick's bill on
Umbrella permit.
an umbrella permits. It's like a master plan permit where a municipality could ask for basically authority to do, to really basically be the permit holder for the Act 250 process. And so then any construction or any development in that area would be a modification to the municipality's permit. So that was another change. And then similar to that, there was a provision called an enhanced designated area, not to be confused with the enhanced village center. Unfortunately, similar names, totally different idea. Enhanced designation area is sort of like municipal delegation. It's like if a municipality can demonstrate that they have sufficiently robust zoning, and the Natural Resources Board is supposed to come out with model zoning. So if a municipality has this model zoning or something sufficient to it, then the municipality could be delegated the authority to run the Act 250 process just for designated areas. So that I've been using this term designated areas a lot. What we mean by that are growth centers, designated downtowns, neighborhood development areas, and these enhanced village centers. I think I'm missing one.
No, I think
There's
you got it.
5. Right, so it would I've heard a lot about the duplication of the Act 250 process with municipal processes, and this would help eliminate that duplication just for projects in a downtown or designated area. Yeah.
Thanks. I like this because our town has got great zoning and all that, and, you know, we've got to do the double process. Who from the town has the authority for the Act 250 stuff? Is it the select board? Is it the DRB? I mean, who's the one who would have that responsibility?
That's a good question. My guess from reading this is that it's not specified. It's a great question.
I don't fully understand the question. Could you ask it again?
So if
exactly?
the town has their own permit for
Yeah.
their area they're developing, and, you know.
For the
and
master
there's
plan
Yeah,
process.
master plan.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Who in the town, you know, has that authority to run that part of it?
Oh, planning and zoning, I assume, right?
I would assume, but I would just be
Yeah.
assuming. So,
Okay.
yeah, that's a great question.
That's all right.
Happy to look further into that.
It's in our committee, so Phil, we can connect.
Yeah, it would probably be the planning and zoning department or whoever would run the permitting.
Yeah.
Wendy Harrison. Senate, housing, economic development, and general affairs, and works on S-100. But there is, Winooski does something similar now. So the city council has to approve the agreement with the state.
Yep.
And it's likely that whoever handles development review now, so you turn here.
Planning and zoning. Yeah, in Heinsberg, it would be that. Yep. Okay.
So Senator Watson, I'm going to ask that you finish up in like 2 minutes because then I do want Senator White, you're done?
Well, I have one more,
Okay, one more. And then we'll shift gears.
which is a point that I forgot to make about the zoning related issues, which is that it does require that for development, a municipality cannot require more than one parking space per dwelling unit unless parking is insufficient, in which case it goes to 1.5. And that is it. Happy to answer any further questions.
We give Senator Watson a round of applause. That was-
And so just as a reminder, that bill is currently, we're on day 2 in-house Environment and Energy Committee to talking about it. We have a few representatives from that committee here. So if you have questions, we'll be walking the halls over the next couple of weeks. Senator White is going to give us a 2-minute summary about what the Senate Natural Resources Energy Committee is talking about with regards to a res bill. And then we'll shift gears to Rep. McCarthy.
Cool. Thank you. So the Renewable Energy Standard Bill, I assume most folks in the room are familiar with what we did back in 2015 and then 2017 around the Renewable Energy Standard. Senate Natural Resources and Energy has a draft bill that was introduced by our chair, Senator Bray, to look at how do we study and move forward on updating the renewable energy standard and change some of the tiers on what it means to hit kind of a goal around our renewable energy. So we have tiers, and I can get into that, of what we need to meet percentage-wise for clean energy, and the bill looks at that conversation. We've taken testimony. It obviously didn't make crossover. Womp womp. So
What's the bill number?
I think it's just a draft. Is it a bill?
It's a committee bill.
Yeah, it's a committee bill. I don't think it has an official number, but we can actually send out the link to the draft. I can send that to you, Mike, if we can share it with folks. So I would say that our committee is invested in having the conversation and moving forward what we need to do this year to keep the conversation going around the renewable energy standard. And we're hoping to work with the House to see what that would look like. And so I'm happy to pass it on to my former colleague from a solar company.
Not representing a solar company.
He's not representing a solar company. But it's just fun because when we have had folks from multiple stakeholder groups come and talk to us about the value of changing our renewable energy standard. And it is both folks who install solar, folks who want solar or renewable energy, and the utility companies. So there's a dynamic conversation happening with lots of different stakeholders on this. So, and I do apologize, Senator Watson and I are called in on an amendment to the legislative pay and benefits bill. So if you're concerned about legislative pay and benefits, don't know why you would be, that's where we're going.
Thank you, Senator White. So it sounds
Might
like
take
that.
my seat.
It sounds like that bill, yeah, come sit here so
Yeah, you
people
want
can
to
see you. It sounds like the bill that Senate Natural is looking at right now is a study. And I think some of the background to that is there is a general broad agreement that there is a need to update our res, but there isn't necessarily broad agreement in what that means, depending on who you're talking to.
So stepping back from the Senate's study bill, which is important, there's also H320 that's on the House side. And I think in conversations I've had with many of you, there was a sense that our real priority in terms of climate legislation was making sure that we acted on S5 this year. And looking to next year, I think what we're trying to do here today is just kind of all get some values on the table that we share around where we get our energy and how we build our energy and how that fits into Vermont's economy and what we want to see in terms of how much of the energy happens in state and is up on our roofs and next to our farms and over our parking lots and on top of our factories, as opposed to coming from out of state. And so the idea of res reform, it has a lot of different facets, but I think I stay grounded in the idea that there's, this tiered system that we have right now. Specifically, one of the kind of perverse things that's happening in terms of incentives and disincentives is that if you tell a utility, you have to have 10% of your in-state renewables under the current law, then that can be considered a ceiling rather than a floor right now. So that's one of the key fundamental things that I think we need to, if we agree as a body and representing our constituents that we want to see more in-state renewables, as we look at reforming the requirements that we have for our utilities and where we purchase our energy from, one of the big key things is moving from 10 to 20% on that tier 2, that in-state renewable purchasing by 2030, and then phasing that in more by 2035. There's a number of evolutions that have sort of happened as the Public Utility Commission has looked at sort of net metering, and that net metering's been our sort of most successful, I think, program in terms of getting renewables deployed, most of that solar here in Vermont. And so, as Senator White was alluding to, in my day job, I work for a company that does a lot of that work. There are also lots of other companies doing that work that employ thousands of Vermonters. And as we have this conversation, one of the big things I think we need to keep in mind is that we have a choice to make about whether we want to continue to support in-state renewables and how much of that makes sense and what our capacity is to really do that. And that keeps dollars in our state and builds our economy and means that we can look at the infrastructure that's getting produced and control it and say, yeah, we know that there's actually that hydroelectric facility or that wind turbine or that solar project is really generating renewable energy right here for our neighbors, versus some of the contracts that we have with out-of-state generation where it's like, yes, this is for a quote unquote renewable facility, but what does that word renewable really mean? What qualifies as renewable? And that's the conversation that we need to be having before we can really do this complete res reform. And so that's why I'm excited about the Senate saying we need to study some of these issues, and then we need to answer those questions and keep this process moving. Why is it something we need to do fast? Well, you saw on some of the sheets that the amount of, for instance, renewables, the new renewables that are being built in Vermont, we had this like sort of period of acceleration, and people were like, wow, there's all these new solar arrays and we've got some new wind projects. And then because of some of the ways that we've ratcheted down the value of especially net metered solar over the last few years, and made siting where you can put renewables more restrictive year after year, we've actually decelerated the deployment of renewables in Vermont. So does everybody get that? Like we're the climate legislators. We have actually pumped the brakes hard on the deployment of renewable energy in Vermont. So this res reform conversation is really about how do we responsibly, in a way that makes sense economically for Vermont, deploy more renewables in state and purchase more renewables from out of state. So developing that cohesive strategy is what this is all about.
Questions? Representative Pat.
Why is in some of the materials I see and in draft legislation, not the study bill, but new renewables is considered 2015 or and after? Why?
Peter might be able to answer that, but I think it has to do with the way that renewable energy credits were used on those projects.
It was an effort to capture a lot of the wind projects and other standard offer projects to make sure that they're still eligible for renewable energy credits. We don't want to see our in-state renewables shut down because they're no longer eligible.
I don't want to get into a debate now, but I have some very significant issues with some elements of this. And when you do this utility by utility, we use the word equity all the time, but you create incredibly inequitable situations for ratepayers around the state when you apply one standard to each utility, when some utilities have already done, without being asked, done what we want them to do, and others haven't. So I will be talking with people about that, and if we get legislation that does create a definition of new at 2015, which I will do my best to either amend that or make exceptions possible to that.
So I think that is a great example of why there might be a suggestion for a study committee this summer, because there are a lot of pieces to dig into in terms of how the res was originally designed in 2015 and what the world looks like now in 2023. Representative Troiano, did you?
I just had a comment. You know, when I was putting my solar in, I was hearing from the power company and from some people in this very body that it was unfair to the other ratepayers for me to produce my own energy through it. But, you know, at town meeting, when I was getting some of the flack on S5, and I related to the body that installing solar and a heat pump eliminated my entire electric bill for the month of December and January so that I heated and powered my house for free. And that really turned the conversation around. I mean, people started asking, instead of being critical, it's like, oh, so how did you do that? Well, you know, how much did it cost? How long will it last? So it really did turn things around. But I was discouraged by people being critical of installing my own power system in that it was unfair to the other ratepayers.
Did you want to answer?
Well, I would just say that, so our policy continues to evolve. And so every 2 years, the program that small renewables like the solar array that you put in, that program gets reevaluated by the Public Utility Commission and stakeholders. There's a public process. And now we're on the cycle where every 2 years it gets evaluated. But some of the things that aren't evaluated in that are things like the caps, like where each one of the incentive tiers inside of the net metering program sort of caps out. So right now we have this weird thing where a lot of people only fill up about half of their roof, even when they could use all of the power from filling up their entire roof with solar on site of their factory or their home or their business or their school. And so we have this kind of weird thing where I think a lot of people would agree maybe the just flat rate inside of that system is too generous and maybe it isn't fair to ratepayers. But the whole system, it just needs a revamp because some parts of it are crushing and choking off what could be really beneficial renewable energy deployment for all ratepayers. And in other places, it's encouraging people to build things that maybe aren't the most efficient way for us to deploy renewables. So it just needs to be revamped for the kind of technology we have now, the grid we have now, and the fact that with other policy like S5, we're encouraging Vermonters to use a lot more electricity. And so we want people to be efficient and we want people to use electricity that's generated right there and used as efficiently as possible. And so right now, the net metering program that we have and the other programs that we have are sort of based on 10 or 15-year-olds technology and grid. And now we need to take a good hard look at like, what do we actually have now and what are the opportunities to do this better? And things like saying, you know what, you might get more value if none of your power is exported out on the grid and you use it all behind the meter. That's another sort of nuance that we might want to think about as we're pursuing this that would sort of solve that whole problem about the issue that some utilities have in some places at some times with cross subsidization.
I've considered that, although the people who installed the solar unit were very good. They examined my power bills for a number of months, and then they recommended the size unit that would power my home based on that average, and it has worked as advertised. I'm making about the amount of power that they suggested I would, and it's powering my home.
So, there are two more. Okay, we'll take two more. Yep. Senator Harrison?
Can you, I have heard that there are disincentives to the current fee structure, but I don't know enough to have suggestions. But could you also look at resiliency in this? It sounds like we're heading toward a study committee, but could you look at resiliency in addition?
Yeah.
Would that fit in?
I think that is a
side benefit.
Well, it's not so much a side benefit. I mean, as we see, it's about frankly helping Vermonters be able to weather the storms that we're going to see more and more of over the next many decades. And so the question is, are there ways that we can perhaps rethink the integration of renewables with our grid, with basic resources. If you have an entire town that's cut off because of a storm event, are there opportunities for storage combined with solar, combined with whatever? And I don't know, what the Senate is talking about right now has not yet come to the House, but presumably it would at some point. And I think that is a key area of how do we round out how we value all of these tools in the toolbox.
Right.
Thank you. Just one other comment on in addition, number 2 here, where it's looking at air quality standards relating to biomass. I just wanted to just flag that, noting that biomass facilities typically require a significant amount of water, access to water for cooling purposes, and sometimes it's groundwater, sometimes it's surface water withdrawal. So I just flag that as part of a study we should be looking at whether if it's doesn't trigger the Clean Water Act Section 401, we're left without the right tools necessary to be able to evaluate the impact to water resources. So I just encourage us to maybe expand that study to look at water resource management.
Thank you, Representative Dolan. Sure, Representative Pouch.
Thanks. I like your term, Mike, putting on the brakes. I think even more, we've been pumping the brakes on this, and the administration has slammed the brakes on wind. And will this study look at the lack of wind and the hole that leaves around nighttime, winter time, and the low cost, and understanding, there's a lot of problems for me even just to bring it up. But that, that becomes the second leg of, if we want to we're not going to build solar panels and get out of it and buy enough batteries, I think, to get us through the winters. So anyways, will it address wind and the restrictions that are on in Vermont?
I don't know if the Senate bill does currently, but again, I made a note and it should be coming to the House. Other thoughts or comments? So because it's so gorgeous and it is also 12:40 and we all are probably going to need to go soon, just a couple of things. We did through some, if you guys may recall, about a month ago, there was a discussion about adding 2 bills to the front page of our priorities document. So you will be getting an updated priorities document. We'd all agreed to add H242-ish, I think, which is the networked geothermal to the front of the bill. And then there was discussion about how do we bring in another bill that Representative Sims had presented, and then also Senator White had sort of a companion type bill. There is now a bill that's on the wall, S145, that basically looks at, it sort of takes some of Representative Sims' structure, which is how do we help establish funding support for towns and communities that are going to see repeated storm events? How do we identify that funding source, and how do we address it through a climate resilience lens? So I will share that bill, or rather, our secretary will share that bill out.
Or rather, he already did yesterday.
Rather, he already did. Rather, I should have read that email more. So anyway, S145 is in your inbox. Thank you. And I will be sharing an updated priorities document. And so if folks can look at that, again, we're making it 2 pages. If folks can look at it, and if you have questions, concerns, you know where to find us. And before we adjourn, just last minute plug to what Representative Troiano was saying about people were like, how do you pay for this? You do have an expert here in the room, Tom Perry, who has been overseeing the Zero Energy Now program for a couple of years in terms of the technical and building side of things. And he's happy to talk you through how he's helped homeowners get to pretty significant savings. So if you want to find him, he's right over there.
Thank you.
And with that, we will adjourn.
All right.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Tomorrow, we have the youth rally here. They will be here from 10 to 2. They're going to be having speeches. They're meeting with legislators to communicate why this caucus and the work that we do is so important to everyone, but really critically to our next generations. And so hopefully you guys will make some time to head outside, say hello, meet our future leaders, doctors, nurses, teachers, everythingers, heat pump installers, and thank them for showing up and speaking up. And hopefully you'll meet with some of your own constituents. So, and please spread the word about that because, the kids are taking the day off from school and it's a big investment from them. And it's important for them to know that their voice matters. So.
I'd rather be in school, no doubt.
Thanks, everybody.
This is the weather.
Oh, never mind.